It's a pleasure to be here. I've come to speak with this club quite a few times. I don't even know. It's been fun over the years.
Just once a year.
Once a year for some years. I made a boo-boo. This right here, NAHBE, stands for North American Honeybee Expo. And Butch was there, and he saw this presentation there in Louisville, and he thought that might be a good choice for your club. So I need to take that off from now on. I forgot about it. It was geared towards that big crowd there. A lot of people came that were thinking about how to expand their outfit from a hobbyist to a sideline, or perhaps a sideline to commercial. And so the first half of it is almost just entertainment, and then the last half we talk about splitting and the possibilities of how you might want to expand your apiary. I use the word apiary. Really, it's expand your outfit. You know, I like to use the word outfit. So how many people here want to expand their outfit? Anybody? Quite a few. So what does that mean? Does that mean 5 to 10, or 10 to 100, or 50 to 1,000? I mean, what's that mean for you?
That means 40 to 50.
40 to 50. From 40 to 50?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right.
Baby steps.
Baby steps, yeah. Well, we're going to talk about baby steps and not so baby steps in this presentation. You can make a mistake by going too fast. So this is a fun picture for me. I'll talk about the pictures as I go. That's part of the entertainment part of it. This picture was taken probably about 10 years ago in Jasper, Florida. We were in an orange grove. I hesitate to call it grove. It was like an orange town. This was a grove that was 42 square miles. And you literally could get lost. I had to use the, northeast west on the dash of my truck to make sure I knew where I was going in this place. So we made, as you can see, we made orange honey that year, so it was kind of fun. This orange crop business is starting to disappear, I'm afraid to say. This green, they call it the greening. I don't understand it completely, but the orange trees in Florida are really suffering, and I don't know that they're going to be around much longer without some sort of divine intervention or something. They're really a mess. For the last 2 years, I was unable to find or purchase orange blossom honey, which I had been doing every year. We sell a lot of honey, and I buy a lot of honey, and orange blossom was traditionally one of those varieties that I like to purchase because it sells really well. And for 2 years running, I was unable to get any. And right now, this year, it's not looking so great. Of course, the season's not over yet. Maybe something will occur. Orange blossom honey is very unique, and I really like it. So anyway, that's a fun picture with me and Sam there. That's a fond memory for me. So, goals, cost, time, and methods, all legitimate concerns if you're trying to expand your operation. What's your goal? The goals really do dictate, the cost that's going to be involved in this thing. Anybody that's buying any kind of beekeeping equipment at all these days knows that there's an extreme cost now. There is a pretty good payday at the end of it all. And in our store, when people come in and ask questions about what it's going to cost in this box and that box, and by the time the list gets added up, they're kind of in sticker shock. And I also have to add that there actually is a payday at the end of all this. If you're successful, if you can just make a 5-gallon bucket of honey a year, I mean, that's a fairly good amount of money, honestly, depending on whether you wholesale, bulk it out, or retail. If you can retail it, it's actually hundreds and hundreds of dollars, so there is a payday. The time, how much time do you have? If you've got a full-time job, you probably have no business running 200 or 300 colonies because you're just going to kill yourself. And the methods, of course, of how you're going to accomplish that, and we're going to talk about all these things. This is a fun picture. This is Sam once again. So this, how crazy are you? I mean, if you want to expand your operation, just how nuts are you here? Sam was an interesting person. He hasn't worked for me for probably 6 or 8 years now. He was a Kung Fu black belt artist and taught classes in it too. And he was good to have around because he was such a good worker. And he said something very interesting once when he talked about, how you become a master of beekeeping. And he says it's all about the reps. He says it's just like Kung Fu. The more you do it, the more you got it. And he was right. If you got 100 colonies and you work them all year long, and you probably popped a lid off a colony 1,000 times in 1 year, that's how you get good at it. So Sam was a character, but he was good to have around. And this was just a load of bees that we were getting ready to send to Wisconsin that particular year. I used to send bees all over the place. I don't do it anymore. I've downsized and I just stay home. But these numbers are kind of, this is just a generalization. Hobby, 1 to 50. 50 can be, that can be a lot of work, honestly. That can be a sideline right there. Sideline, 50 to 300. Again, 300 can really feel like a full-time job depending on how you're working them. And what you're going to have to make up your mind on is, you know, there's two ways to make money at this beekeeping thing. You can just produce and sell, or you can develop what they call it, value-added products, where you take honey and perhaps you infuse it, perhaps you make it into mead, perhaps you do a lot of things that makes it more valuable than it was in the first place. So, you know, I have a couple friends that are full-time making a good living with just 300, 350 colonies, but they're doing all this extra stuff too. So, you know, there's two ways of looking at that. Of course, full-time 300 and up, for sure. You get above 300, you're talking about a full-time job. I often get asked the question, you know, how many colonies can one person run? And the average operation with the average amount of output, you know, depending on, you know, like I mentioned, if you're not trying to go crazy with all these value-added products, one person can run 400 colonies, perhaps 500 colonies, and do a pretty good job. I did it for years, honestly. At one year, I actually ran 700 colonies by myself. I did everything. I delivered the honey, I extracted, and honestly, I just about made myself sick that year. When it was over, I said, this has got to come down a notch. And up until that point, I'd had the help of my teenage sons, who both left home, on good terms. One went to college and the other wanted to be a rock star, and that's all good. And so that 1 year after they were all gone, I had been at 700, and I just stuck with the 700. I did a really good job, had my bees in really good shape at the end of the year. I really had gotten to the point where I was making myself ill, and I knew I needed to bring it down, and I brought it down to about 450. So here we go. This can get expensive fast. This honey house belongs to a friend of mine in Maryville, Tennessee. And in case you haven't guessed, he's extremely particular about everything. His hives, I was over there speaking at the Maryville Club just a few weeks ago, and his truck looks just like this, you know, so he's that kind of guy. And you're going to have to decide how you want to approach this. I asked him if he would make a floor like that all over again if he had it to do again, and he said probably not, because it's like buying a new car. Every little scratch kills you, you know. And so he has to take very good care of his floor. But there's a serious amount of money. He's just a sideliner. I don't know how many colonies he's got. He's just over 100, maybe 150. I don't even know what to guess here. He's got tens and tens of thousands of dollars. He built the building. And then through that door is his warming room where he brings in the crop. So he's got some serious money invested. I have a friend that has just retired from commercial beekeeping, and he ran 500 colonies by himself for decades. And he said the problem with beekeeping as a living is, he says, I'm making the same amount of money as as a journeyman plumber or carpenter, but he says I've got 20 times the investment. They just got a van and some tools, and I've got hundreds of $1,000s worth of stuff. But if you take care of it, it actually is an asset that is liquidatable later. And that's how I've looked at my business. I've always thought, as I've grown throughout the years, if I had no problem buying something, and perhaps even buying it on credit, as long as I thought it would pay its own payments and at least break even. Earn the money back that made the payments, and perhaps make my life easier, make the work easier. And my attitude was, eventually this thing is paid for and I'll have that asset that's worth something. That's my 401k. I haven't saved money. I just keep investing in my business over and over. My wife once asked me, when are we going to stop spending money? And I said, well, when we're done beekeeping, because that's how it works, you know. It's just this endless output of money. But I've got a tremendous amount of assets now that are worth something. Almost 95%, I would say, paid off. And so when my time comes, that's my retirement. And that's how I've approached my business. So don't be afraid of spending money on this thing. If you take care of the stuff, it's something you can sell later. And unless you take that attitude, the money you're about to spend if you're expanding your operation, it's just crazy. It doesn't make sense until you say, okay, I've got something here that's worth money. This is something I can sell later, turn over, trade, whatever. Anyway, I just have to share that picture because it's so beautiful. Let's see. Forecast your purchases by defining your goals. Buy right or buy twice. Now this is easier said than done, but if you know where you're going, if you have a goal in mind and you're confident that you're going to do it, a lot of people think they want to do it and then never quite pull it off once they find out that beekeeping is like digging ditches with overalls on in the summer and you get stung at the same time, and why in the world am I doing this? But if it's something you're confident you're going to do and you're going to stick with it, try to look ahead and buy what you're going to need in the end. Like an extractor is a good example. Perhaps the truck you're going to buy, perhaps the building you're going to build. You know, there's so many ways to look at this. Even if you just got 50 to 100 colonies, you're going to need a truck. I mean, you're not going to do this in the back of your Volkswagen, you know. So, you know, what's the end, where am I going to be, and just what's the right vehicle? What's the right extractor? And so extractors and stuff, the expense can just scare you to death. You know, my extractor now, if I was buying it brand new, would be like $60,000 or $70,000. And that is my extractor. I see sorry, I forgot what the picture was up there. That's my extractor. That darn thing, brand new today, is worth $60,000 or $70,000. And that's just the extractor. That's not all the tanks and all this stuff. But again, when I'm ready to be finished here, that's an asset that can be liquidated, and that's how I approach it. This is back in Arcadia, Florida. Me and a friend of mine, Alberto's, helping me load that semi-truck. Is that your goal? Do you want to be a full-time commercial beekeeper? Are you going to be loading semis? That could dictate the type of equipment that you're going to purchase and the type of land you're going to purchase and the trucks you're going to purchase and all of these things. So looking ahead, again, buy right or buy twice. Easier said than done. Perhaps you don't have the money to buy it right, which was in many cases my problem, but it's something to consider. Yeah, don't go 5 to 500. It's not going to work. Crash and burn. Yeah, that's a very good description of what's going to happen. I've sold nucs and packages and been aware of people that had 10 or 15 colonies for 3 or 4 years and had a really good crop, and they got out the calculator and the pencil and they say, my goodness, I can make some serious money at this, and go out and take a loan or, you know, borrow money from their parents. I remember one guy doing that, serious amount of money. And then in a couple times, those people that had bought nucs to get started from me and I became aware of their situation would call me 3 or 4 years later and say, we've got a lot of really good used equipment to sell. Because they didn't grow with the outfit. They just went kaboom. Running 500 colonies is a whole different skill set than running 15. You have to grow, as your apiary grows, you have to grow at the same time. You just can't go from the ground to the heavens in 1 year. It just does not work because you don't have the skill to pull it off. I often say you can triple every year. Now even that sounds like a lot, but if you think about it, if you got 10, then you got 30, then you got 90, now you got 270. You can do that. A smart person can pull that off, but you can't go 15 to 500 in 1 year. You're just going to blow it and lose everything, honestly. You certainly will crash and burn. That's a fun picture. That's a holding yard in Byramville, Georgia. When I used to go to South Georgia, I would, from that place, stage bees and send them north or to California or different places. And that's just some bees that are getting ready to be loaded on a semi-truck to go to Wisconsin in that particular year. It's sunset. You can't tell by the picture, but it's just, the sun is just setting. We're about ready to pull the semi-truck up there and load it up. This is important. If you're serious and you're going to move ahead, consistency equals efficiency equals productivity. Keep it all the same if it's at all possible. You can see by the picture here that stacking these colonies on this truck was very efficient. It was easy to tie down. It was a good load. You don't want a bunch of double deeps and a bunch of deep and a shallow and a bunch of singles. Try to figure out what it is you're going to do and how you're going to run your bees, and for better or worse, you know, you can always change it later, but try to get everything the same, because suddenly your time becomes utilized in a much better fashion. And a case in point was me. You know, I do everything wrong. I can tell you what to do now that I've done it all wrong. In the beginning, when I moved to Georgia, I had deeps and mediums, and then I got a terrible case of tennis elbow in my left elbow, and I thought, if I'm going to keep doing this, I better back it on down to shallow. So I started buying shallow supers, and suddenly I was running shallows and mediums and maybe a few deeps through my extractor, and what a mess trying to keep the frames sorted. Suddenly things were not efficient anymore. And luckily I got over my tennis elbow later on, and then wished I would have just went with the mediums, because the shallows are so inefficient when you compare them to a medium. And by the way I got over my tennis elbow was apitherapy. I just stung myself, and it went away in a week. This is 25 years ago, and it never came back, so that worked for me. You could do a whole lecture on just bee sting therapy if you wanted, but you can see how things all being the same could add up to efficiency. I think I don't have to say too much about that. I think it probably makes sense to everybody. Keep it the same if at all possible. Again, keep it all uniform if possible. You can see how stacking, just something as simple as stacking equipment on the truck so it'll tie down well. This is a fun picture. All of those guys used to work for me. Sam, the fellow I mentioned earlier, is on the left. That's Raul in the center, and David Watson on the right. And that's in Jasper, Florida, where we were on gallberry locations that year. And yes, that truck is full, and yes, that truck's overloaded, and it was a Sunday, so the scales were closed.
That's a good nugget.
It's true. I'm sorry. I know there's probably at least one police officer in this room. But Sundays are a good time to travel with an overloaded truck, because we do it all the time, or used to do it all the time. It's not part of my life anymore. So here's some ways you can think about expanding, and they're all legit. They all have their pros and cons. You can catch swarms. If you're a brand new beekeeper in the room and you've bought some equipment and your strategy is to catch swarms, yeah, it can work. Maybe. You've got to find the swarms, you've got to get the calls and so on. So it's a legit strategy, but just be aware that you may not just get it done right away. Purchasing packages is absolutely legitimate. Walkaway splits, split existing colonies, split with swarm cells, and purchase colonies, and we're going to knock them off one by one. And the first is catching swarms. It is cheap and it is easy, but back to my statement that it's a maybe. So if you're a brand new beekeeper or don't have any bees yet, and this is your strategy, just be aware it could take a while. If you're going to catch swarms and you're serious about it, you need to give your phone number to the local fire department and the local police department, because they're the ones that get the phone calls saying, oh my God, I've got these bees on my front porch, and somebody's got to come get them, you know, and then they'll call you if they've got your phone number. So that works, believe it or not. And that was in Unadilla, Georgia. That's about as easy as it gets. It was just a limb on one of those little pines behind me. That's a very nice swarm. We just I held it while somebody cut it with the pruners, and that's what you see right there. I'm done climbing 30-foot ladders. I'm not doing that anymore. That's for younger people. I had a next door neighbor that was a beekeeper this was 25 years ago too. He was an older fella, and I live out in the country, so he could do this. One day I was out in the front porch of my house there, and I heard a gunshot. And then I heard another gunshot, and another, and another, and another. And oh my God, what's going on over at Al's house? Is he in trouble? And I went over there. He had a swarm 30 feet up, and he was shooting the limb off with a gun. And he got it down. He got the swarm. That thing just collapsed. He had a big sheet down on the ground. He knew right where it was going to fall. And he had a 30-06, and he was just cutting that limb off. So that was good old Al. Okay. So purchasing packages is legit. This is just a fun picture for me because this is at our warehouse one year when we were staging packages to sell. I used to produce a lot of packages in my heyday, going to South Georgia and all that stuff 8-10 years ago. We were producing 1,500 packages a year and 1,500 nucs, and actually this club was a part of picking up some of that stuff. You guys used to come down to Unadilla, and you were part of that. pick up loads of nucs, in some cases 100, 150, 175 one year, I think.
190 we brought back.
190, yeah, that's a lot of nucs.
That was a fun trip.
Fun trip. Were you part of those trips too?
I got to make one.
Did you? Yeah. Yeah, they're fun. Packages are interesting. We'll talk about the differences between packages and nucs, pros and cons to both. They are good for beginners, and for a reason that most people wouldn't think of. If you're a brand new beekeeper, you've never had bees before, when you install a package rather than installing a nuc, you get to watch the growth from day one. You get to see the first wax get drawn out and the first eggs being laid and the larvae, and you see the whole progression. And if you're doing this for the fun of it, that's fun, okay, watching that whole process. When you buy a nuc, you're already buying something that's 5 frames drawn out, the queen's been laying for weeks and brood in all stages, and you know, you miss that little growth period if you're a brand new beekeeper. If you've got some experience, you don't care about that at all. You just want something you can put in the box and try to make some honey the first year. That's the big differences between nucs and packages. Buying a package the first year in this area, the odds are kind of against you making surplus honey in that same season, whereas if you get a nuc early enough and it's a good season, you could make a super or 2 even in the first season. So, but packages are easier to install in my view than a nuc, a little less precarious. You can purchase them earlier than nucs, although if you get a package 3 weeks earlier than a nuc, don't think you've gained much, because the nuc, when you purchase it 3 weeks later, is 4 or 5 weeks ahead of the package, because again, you've got brood in all stages, you've got a tested queen. If the beekeeper selling you the nuc has done their job right, they've allowed that queen to lay long enough so that they can read the brood pattern. In other words, perhaps her eggs are becoming sealed, and the beekeeper can look at that and figure out if it's a bad queen or not. I know a lot of nuc producers do not do that. They just install a queen. As soon as they see eggs, that thing's sold and it's gone. That's not the best way to do it. So they can be earlier than nucs. They're less expensive than nucs, of course. In my store this year, nucs were $195 and packages are $125. So that's a $70 difference, and that might be important to you. You gain experience by watching all phases of the colony growth. I mentioned that. So purchasing nucs, again, pros and cons. There's Sam again, and that's Mr. Harris, by the way, right there, the man I said I was talking about at dinner. Good guy. I have a fun, this is off subject. Now, Terry knows me good enough. She knows I go down rabbit holes while I'm talking, so here's a rabbit hole for you. Terry Harris right there is an older gentleman. He's probably 78, 79 right now. Worked for me for probably 6 or 7 years. And I have a pretty neat video on him. It was meant to be about beekeeping, but it turned out to be about his experiences in Vietnam and some of his life experiences. It's simply called Georgia Beekeeper Terry Harris. It's a fun story. It was really a special interview for me. It's worth watching in my opinion. Anyway. That's nuc boxes on the back of that 1-ton truck. When in same years you guys were coming down, we were.
Good boxes.
I miss those boxes.
You've seen those boxes before? Yeah.
I have those boxes.
You have those boxes, yeah. Well, there was a group of guys in Hendersonville, North Carolina, that would buy about 400 a year from us, and we'd truck them up to them, you know, for a fee, and that's what's happening right here. They're just loading the truck for a trip up to Hendersonville. We used to sell a lot of nucs. Don't do it quite as much anymore. So they are easy to they are also easy to install, but they're just different. The queen is established. I mentioned that. Head start, better odds over packages for a honey crop. So yeah, again, pros and cons. This purchasing nucs is, well, and purchasing packages too, is a little precarious. You're kind of at the mercy of the producer. There's so much that can be done incorrectly. For instance, if you're buying a package, and as a brand new beekeeper, you don't have a way of figuring this out. It's kind of like buying a used car from a car lot. You're at their mercy. Is it good or is it not? If you purchase a package from a really high quality package producer, they're going to wait and shake their bees or shake their packages in the middle of the day when the field force is out. I know of several guys that purposely shake really, really early at the very first light before the bees are flying, and they shake, they don't shake in the brood nest, they shake from the honey supers, and you get a lot of older bees that way. And that when you hear about packages failing, early supersedure, all of this stuff, a lot of times it just has to do simply with the time of day that the package was shaken. A high quality producer will try to get you a good quantity of young bees in that package. Somebody who's unscrupulous would probably rather do the opposite, get you all their older bees and keep the young bees for themselves. But again, I don't even know why I mentioned that. There's really no way for a new beekeeper to figure that one out. And nucs, sometimes when you purchase nucs, you are getting their garbage. You get their old black stuff, stuff that's as black as your tennis shoes right there. And yeah, most nuc producers, myself included, I'm going to sell you my frames. I'm not going to sell you my frames that were just drawn out last year. You're going to get my 3, 4, 5-year-old frames. That's part of the attractiveness of producing nucs. It's how I cycle combs endlessly without having to throw them in the dumpster. It's not about selling my old garbage. It's about selling frames before they turn into garbage, so I'm constantly cycling. It's like buying new machinery every 2 years and sell the used stuff for a good price. The buyer's happy because it's cheaper than new, and you're happy because you're cycling, and that's kind of the game I play with making nucs. Walkaway splits is the worst way to make a queen. A lot of people do it. I've done a lot of it, so it works, and there are a couple tricks to make it better. There's 4 ways to produce a queen, generally speaking. You have swarm cells, you have supersedure cells, you have cells that we graft and produce ourselves as beekeepers, and then the lowest, the worst, is actually the queens that are made under the emergency queen production impulse. If a colony suddenly loses their queen and they make their own, sometimes it goes great and sometimes it does not. And there are some things that you can pay attention to make the process better. And one is right there. Make sure whatever you put in that walkaway split that they've got fresh pollen. They've got to have good nutrition to make a good queen. And if they don't, they're gonna make a queen just like a malnourished mother that has to feed her brand new baby. Somehow that stuff is going to come out of her system and she's going to get the job done, but it's not going to be the premium food that it would have been if the mother would have had premium nutrition herself, if that makes sense. Make sure you got fresh pollen in that situation, and make sure also that you shake in lots of young nurse bees, okay? It's the young bees that are going to do the job. So if you're making a walkaway split, you might consider taking 1 or 2 frames of open brood where there's a lot of nurse bees, shake those extra bees into your walkaway split before you walk away with it to make sure they've got a lot of young bees. And the other thing you can do is feed it thin sucrose syrup. Just because they've got honey in the comb doesn't mean that it's not stimulating enough. Thin sucrose syrup, in other words, thinner than 1-to-1, keeping in mind that fresh nectar is very thin, much thinner than 1-to-1 sucrose syrup, highly stimulating. It elicits hygienic behavior. It produces an antiseptic situation in the colony. I know I talked about it to this group in the past, but we'll hit on it just for a second here. And that is when you're feeding very thin sucrose syrup, the same thing can happen with a fresh nectar flow. The bees are adding enzymes. One of those enzymes is glucose oxidase, which produces gluconic acid, which lowers the pH, makes an antimicrobial situation. A byproduct of that situation is the production of hydrogen peroxide. You're creating an antiseptic situation. If you feed very thin sucrose syrup, you're emulating what happens when the bees are changing nectar into honey. And the same thing can happen when they're making a queen. They need this and to really create the very best of queens. And then the final thing you can do is keep in mind that the bees usually will produce queens from anywhere from a 24 to 48 hour larva. But occasionally they'll make a cell from something that's older than 48 hours. Bees feed the same food to a queen cell and a worker cell up to 48 hours. It's royal jelly. After 48 hours, the worker bees start to get fed something a little different. I just simply call it brood food. It's no longer the same chemistry as royal jelly. So if you've got a larva that has been off of the royal jelly diet for even a little while, now you're venturing into a different realm of quality of queen, you know. And so what you do is if you go back in 4 days and look at this thing, you'll have perhaps as many as 6 or 8 or 10 cells in there. Maybe it's only 2. But if you can find the ones that are sealed and crush them and leave the ones that are unsealed, you just killed all the cells that were made from an older larva. And you've left the ones that were made from a younger larva. So that can be a kind of a strategy too. Now obviously, if you don't have any unsealed queen cells, you know, you got to go with the older ones. You just pick the best ones. Also another thing, and I learned this one the hard way many years ago, and that is that if you make a pretty substantial walkaway split that's perhaps 4, 5, 6, 7 frames of bees with 3, 4, 5 frames of brood, and it's this time of year, they're going to make a bunch of queen cells, and quite often the first cell that hatches, that virgin will swarm. I call it a virgin queen swarm. And then the colony they're very optimistic this time of year. If you make a walkaway split in a very late spring or early summer, they're much less apt to do that. But right now, the first virgin out might swarm on you, and even possibly the second virgin out might swarm on you. So you got to be aware of that. I learned this the hard way 25, 30 years ago. I made I still remember the number. I made 140 walkaway splits. I was broke. I couldn't afford a queen if I had to. And I just split all these colonies into 4 frames of brood across the board and let them go. And I had 140 sitting in one location in Hollywood, Georgia. And the landowner called me up and said, "Bob, you got 100 swarms in the trees." I said, "Well, that's funny, Ron, because there's no queens in those. There's no queens in those colonies. They couldn't have swarmed." He said, "Trust me, you've got 100 swarms in the trees." And I went to look, and he was right. And they were all these little bitty swarms. They were all full of virgin queens. And that's a lesson learned the hard way again. So walkaway splits work. There's there's a few things you can make them better. Split existing colonies. This is a good way to rotate comb. If you're thinking along the lines that I was mentioning by making nucs to keep turning your comb over, making your own colonies rather than buying them, can rotate equipment also. If you're thinking of making these things to sell, you can consider selling the box, the lid, and the bottom board too, which is kind of what I'm doing these days. So you're rotating everything. It's very cost effective, and you can control your stock. If you're making your own colonies, you can purchase the queens with the genetics you want, or better yet, if you're willing and you're not intimidated by the process, make your own queen cells. Choose your very best breeder queens, or we actually purchase an artificial inseminated breeder queen so we can introduce the genetics we want. What you gotta, let's see if I've written it down there, investment in equipment and not the bees. Consider this, if you've got 20 or 30 colonies or whatever the number and you want to triple, you could go out and buy packages and you could go out and buy nucs, but if you've got the bees to do it with, if you split your bees and only purchase the equipment, if you fail, you still got your investment. But if you went out and bought a bunch of bees and you failed, you've only got a portion of your investment. So that's something worth listening to. And also, you need to understand that you do not have to make a huge nuc to have it ready for winter. If you've got 20 colonies and you want to go to 100, but you still want to make honey, you don't have to split that thing to pieces. Right now, today, 1 frame of brood and a frame of food and a queen or a queen cell will be ready for winter if you treat it right. Now that may entail some artificial feed later on in the form of thin sucrose syrup, so they'll build comb and rear brood and all of that stuff. The only thing that might slow you down is if you go into a pollen dearth. But you've got pollen coming in around here for a while, at least a month and a half, I would say. So you could take those original colonies and perhaps take 3 or 4 frames of brood out of each one, which probably would make you more honey because the darn thing won't swarm on you if it's a big monster colony like Butch has right now. And so it's like a win-win. We do it all the time, and we do it artificially. We keep feeding later on in summer and keep growing our colonies. Split, split again, split again. Yes, you can split with swarm cells. Works great. there is a big but in here that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Swarm cells make the best queens, as I mentioned, and there's some research lately that's showing it's more than just the bees being highly motivated and, you know, really giving it the very best nutrition. They're actually showing that when a queen lays an egg in a swarm cell, in relation or in comparison to an egg that gets laid in a worker cell, that egg is already better. It's a little bigger, it's a little fatter, it already has better nutrition before it even hatches. So that's one of the reasons, besides, you know, high degree of nutrition, that a swarm cell makes a really good queen. And also, if you have colonies that swarm on you, I used to get depressed when a colony swarmed. It was like, oh man, that was a $100 bill, it just flew away, right? Well, once I got into this idea that I could split the colony in half, in thirds, in quarters, and create more colonies with the cells that they had created, I got over that disappointment because I started to look at that as a harvest too. Now, if you've only got 5 colonies and you don't want 10 or 20, that, you know, you can still make those splits and you can sell them, you can give them away, you can use them to requeen another colony. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with a brand new queen in a nuke box. So I would consider just splitting we do it all the time. We carry double screen boards on our trucks. If we find a double deep colony that has swarmed, we put a cell and brood in the top, a cell and brood in the bottom, put a double screen board in the middle with the entrance going out the back, and it just greatly increased the odds of success of that colony being successful in requeening itself. Newer beekeepers, beware. You think just because you've got a queen cell in a colony that just swarmed, that there's no guarantee here. In fact, it's much less than a guarantee. It might only be 75% odds of success in that situation. So when you've got 2 halves rearing a queen, of course it's possible that both halves can fail. It's not probable. But if one half fails and the other half makes it, you just pull the board out and put them back together, and you haven't lost much, because if your timing's right, you still got the same bees that were there when you split the thing. Of course, later on they'll increase in size once the queen starts to have hatching brood. And then if both halves make it, guess what you got? You got 2 colonies. So yeah, consider when you have a colony that is swarmed, consider splitting it up so you are making that a harvest also. Purchasing colonies is legit. If you want to go from 20 to 100 rather than splitting your colonies to pieces, what about purchasing another 10 or 20 colonies? I know I just got through telling you invest in equipment, not bees, but don't buy all of the colonies, just buy some good colonies and split them to pieces, and that works too. Split for increase, split to pollinate, split for honey production, all of the above. That's in Jasper, Florida. That's a fun day. It was kind of cold. You can look at these colonies here. They just come off the gallberry flow. There are many ways to increase from existing colonies. All have their pros and cons. You can actually, I know this sounds crazy to most people, you can actually produce your own packages, and it's a legit way of expanding without even moving frames of brood. Make you a homemade funnel and shake your own packages. Get you some of those. Many of you in this room, I'm sure, have old used packages in your garage that you saved and don't even know why you're saving them, but there they are, and you can make your own packages, move them down the road to the next yard or wherever you've got bees in another spot, and start from scratch with a package that you produced. It's easy to make packages. The main thing is just got to find the queen. This time of year, of course it's going to be really cold tonight, but this might be the last frigid night, at least up in our area. If you take a strong double deep colony that's full of bees right now, you can literally shake half the bees out of that thing and they'll be fine. The bees that are left over will take care of the brood. In 2 or 3 weeks it'll look like you shook nothing at all. So it works. I mean, people shake packages for a living for a reason. Now we're going to talk about splitting methods. These were single-story colonies, very strong single-story colonies. This method is really good for newer beekeepers that are intimidated at the idea of trying to find a queen. You can do this with never have to see the queen. It works great. In this case, we have a pallet of single-story colonies. All of them are strong. Up to my left hand there was an empty box. It was just an empty box with nothing in it. We're shaking the bees off of the assets that we want to use to create nukes with. I'm leaving 3 frames of brood and a frame of food behind in that lower colony. I'm shaking all the bees off. Of course, I'm looking for the queen as I'm doing it. If I see her, I place her in the bottom box and the shaking is over. But if you never see the queen, just shake the bees off all the frames you want, put them in that second box, put an excluder on that single-story colony, put the second box on the top, and the next day when you come back it'll be full of bees and the queen won't be there. Now you can take all of that stuff and make nukes, and you never had to find the queen. The bees will come through the excluder overnight, cover the brood and honey above, queen free, works good. And this is the process. The next day I'm taking those assets and creating nukes, and this is the way we like to make nukes that we're either going to sell or increase with. A frame of food, then a nice frame of brood like this. Sealed brood it's helpful to have some good sealed brood that's either hatching in the moment or going to hatch very quickly. That way the nuke's going to have some nice young bees to grow quickly. We'll put 2 frames of brood with the frame of food. You can see this frame right here, the center is hatched out, but all that periphery there, the perimeter, is still hatching. So that's a really good frame to give a new colony. Young bees that have both never been out of the house and are very ready to accept a new queen. The older bees do not like to accept a new queen. When you're having a bad stinging incident in your bee yard, you can bet that most of that is coming from the older field force foraging type of bees. They're the ones that are feisty, fiery, don't want to be messed with, don't want to accept a new queen. But if you can get rid of those, your odds of getting your queen accepted go up greatly. So shake in extra bees. In our case, in that upper box, I would have put a couple extra combs that attracted bees up through the excluder. I'll actually use that comb in the nuke. And then the end result will be this: 1 foundation, 1 food, 2 broods, and 1 drawn comb. And we'll put either a queen cell in there or a caged queen, and we'll feed it. We'll put a 1-gallon bucket on it, and they will draw that foundation out. And 3 weeks later, that thing is ready to sell, because the queen that we put in will start laying within 2 or 3 days. So 3 weeks later, she's got a bunch of sealed brood. We can really read the situation. And if we put in a queen cell, we give it 5 weeks, because that's how long. You need another 2 weeks, for a virgin queen to mate and start laying over using a caged queen. So that's the time frame, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, depending on whether it's a caged queen or a virgin queen cell. Again, provide the nuke a lot of good nutrition, because depending on how you made it, it might have just lost a lot of its field force. And if you're really want almost a guarantee of success, do it when there is a nectar flow, and the bees are much more likely to accept a new queen than if it's a dearth. You can even do this artificially by feeding. We feed when we make nukes right off to help with queen introduction. Gorged bees always will accept a queen or cell or whatever it is you're doing. Gorged bees will accept the situation much better than hungry bees that are experiencing no nectar flow, no feeding. But if it's a dearth, you have to feed in such a way that you're not causing robbing. If you cause a robbing frenzy in your bee yard, your queen acceptance just went down the tubes. So you have to be very careful when you're feeding if there's a dearth. The pictures I just showed you came from this yard, which was dedicated to making nukes this season. It made 4 nukes that season and a super of sourwood honey. It was a good year. So what we did is we made 3 nukes off of those singles. In between each round, we would put a 2-gallon bucket of feed on them, thin sucrose syrup. We'd leave them with the 4 frames you saw earlier, 3 frames of brood and a frame of food. We would draw it almost to the edges. We didn't want them to plug out. We'd get them working on the 9th frame or so, and then we'd split it again, and then we did it again, and we did it 3 times, then grew it out to be a single by the 1st of July, put a super on it. It made most of a super. These made most of a super of sourwood. Again, it was a good year. Then after the sourwood was over and we collected that honey, we did it again. We split them right after the sourwood and then grew both the split and the colonies out to be ready for winter. And we love to use double screen boards. I mentioned them earlier. They're a great way to make a nuke for several reasons. This is the same routine. We're shaking the bees off the combs, putting the assets above an excluder, just like we did in the single-story colonies. Instead of putting them in a nuke box, after we put them over an excluder, this is on a double deep, we'll come back and we'll just take out the excluder and put in the double screen board, and we'll introduce the cell or the queen into that third story. Now, there's a couple things happening here that are advantageous. One is the nuke is in the same yard it was produced, so all of the older bees go home. Every bee that knows its way home goes home. All you have left upstairs is just the young bees that are much more apt to accept a new queen. And so at first you say, well, okay, now I've only got 50% of the bees. What about the brood staying warm? You have the heat that's generated in the bottom colony coming up through the double screen, and you actually only need about 50% of the bees that you would have needed to take care of the same amount of brood. And then after they get over the shock of this whole thing and get reestablished, a week later, that extra warmth allows the queen to expand the brood nest even faster. In 3 weeks, this thing's going to be like 5 or 6 frames of brood. And then we harvest it, and there might be a frame or two of brood left behind with a little bit of assets. If you're using this as a swarm control measure, you knock that bottom colony down pretty hard so it won't swarm on you. And if your timing is just right, now you can take the assets that are left over and put in the colony below and boost it just as the honey flow is starting. One of the problems with swarming is that if the colony peaks in population before the honey flow starts, it's a given that in many cases it's going to make preparations to swarm. If it peaks in population just as or just after the honey flow starts, the odds go way down. So if you can trick the colony into peaking after the honey flow starts, the odds of making honey are much greater. And that's our technique for trying to create swarm control. There's a lot of ways, checkerboarding. I know Butch and Bill, all these guys here can tell you all these methods, and that's a lecture in itself. Our method is to split the colony down to a level so it'll peak after the honey flow starts. If you're doing this technique and collect that nuke right as the honey flow starts, you boost it with whatever brood and bees are left upstairs there, and suddenly you've got a stronger colony right on that did not swarm right on the verge of the honey flow. Or if you really want to get crazy, you can take that nuke, kill the queen down below, and requeen the colony with a 5 or 6 frame nuke. Guess what you just created? You just created a monster.
Bee bomb.
Bee bomb. That thing, and if your timing is just right and the flow has just started, they'll just settle into making honey, and you just requeened. I mean, there's just so many possibilities to do with this technique. So mated queens or queen cells, pros and cons to both. Mated queens give you a 2-week head start. Theoretically, if you're buying it from a reputable producer, you know that queen's good, highly likely to do a good job for you in the nuke you're selling or the nuke you're using. But there is an advantage to queen cells too, and that is they go through a little bit of a brood break, which is a healthy thing for a colony. When a colony swarms in nature, that slight brood break is actually a healthy thing. It's time for viruses and things to kind of settle down a little bit before they fire back up again. So there's benefits to both. I, of course, like using queen cells because we're, using our artificially inseminated breeder queens to create the genetics in our outfit that we really want. This was in Unadilla. Actually, this is near Montezuma, Georgia, which is right next to Unadilla. This yard, in those days, we had a cell building yard that was 72 colonies, and we were producing 600 to 900 cells a week. And Tommy came out of the shack with these frames, and he just had to have his picture taken because, as you can see, not only are they beautiful cells, but there's only just a couple missing. So he was really happy. And now, if you're doing a walkaway split or you're grafting, the biggest mistake that people make is trying to go too early. You got to make sure you got drones that are mature enough to mate. And just because you see a drone in the colony doesn't mean he's ready to mate. A drone needs to be 2 to 3 weeks old to be mature enough to mate. To be more precise, the minimum age for a drone to be mature enough to mate ranges between 12 and 16 days. And if you want to graft or produce your walkaway split, what you need to know you have in your colonies is mass quantities of drone pupa that are in the purple eye stage. Once they have purple eyes, they're going to be mature enough to mate at the same time that your virgin queen is ready to mate. If you do the math, it adds up pretty good. That's a dedicated drone comb, which we use. And they're green, as you can see. Purco makes them, Acorn makes them, I think Man Lake has them. And we try to put one in every colony, not only because we want lots of drones, but I just took a picture of this today in the bee yard, last bee yard we were in. I had a colony that had taken brand new foundation and took a big corner of it and made it into drone brood, which was supposed to be nice worker brood. And so not only did it create this drone brood, but it screwed up the frame right next to it because that drone brood sticks out far enough that the comb next to it has to become concave to accept that. So if you've got that going on in the middle of your brood nest can actually become inefficient. Now if you look at Mother Nature, they can rear anywhere, so the research says anywhere from 17 to 33% of their comb will be drone brood, but they always put it around the outside. You don't see it in the middle. Kind of put this picture in your head. Let's say it's early February or late January and your colony has just started to produce a lot of brood and it's trying to build up. Well, they're not building drone brood yet. They won't be doing that for another month. But if you've got a bunch of drone cells in the middle of your brood nest, they've got to keep that warm too. You know, it's like having a house that's too big. You got to heat the whole thing so the one room is warm enough. And so and it's just me, I've never seen any research on it, it's just me talking and theorizing, but I think having drone comb in the middle of your brood nest creates an inefficient brood nest. And same thing happens in late summer too when they're not rearing drones again. So we always try to put one of these frames in every colony and allow them to have a place to rear drones without screwing up all our good worker comb. And yeah, they're still going to make a mess. There's still going to be some corners here and there, and the typical burr comb in between the two boxes is full of drone brood. But if you have a green frame, I call them green frames, if you have a drone brood frame in there, you're going to have a lot less of that. So I recommend putting one in every colony. And of course the first thing that somebody's going to ask is, well, aren't you rearing a bunch of mites because mites prefer drone brood? And the answer is yes and no. They're going to do it. Trust me, they're going to, I mean, it's Mother Nature. They're going to, this is their reproduction mode. They're going to find a way to make a bunch of drones, whether you provide it or not. And if you're into doing mechanical mite suppression techniques, taking this drone comb out every time it gets sealed and putting it in the freezer is a good way to bring your mites number down. So you know, a lot of people use this situation for bringing their mites down too. Overwintered nucs, again, if you can keep splitting into late summer, and if it's just a small 3 or 4 frame nuke, you can overwinter it over a double screenboard on top of a stronger colony. And guess which colonies are going to be your very best colonies the next spring? It's going to be the nuke you made in late July into August, because the queen is going to be superior. Queens, okay. Let's talk about queens for a moment. I got time, right? We're not inhibited. Okay. All right, let's talk about queens for a minute. The very best production queens right now are queens that were reared in late summer last year. Because just like human beings, queens have to get a little bit of maturity under their belt before they give you their highest production. Brother Adam, who wrote the book Beekeeping at Buckfast Abbey, and is famous for producing the Buckfast line of bees, wrote in that book that he would make late summer nukes, overwinter those queens in the nuke, he would requeen his production colonies with those queens, and they were invariably his best producing colonies the next year. Now, so why would you want to, so we're all about putting new queens in the spring, and that's a good thing too, because a queen from this given calendar year will head a colony that is much less likely to try to swarm than a queen from the previous year. A queen from the previous fall will be less likely to swarm than a queen from the previous spring, and so on and so on. It basically comes down to the older the queen is, the more likely she is to swarm. The thing you don't want to have happen in your colonies, and I saw several of them today in mine, is have a queen that's gone through 2 spring cycles, because they reach this massive peak, whatever it is, 1,500, 2,000 eggs a day. And if they do that 2 times, in my view, they have now just seen the top of the hill. Maybe they're not completely over it, but their peak is behind them. And you can actually have a queen that's only a year and a few months old that has experienced that. Or you could have a queen that's almost 2 years old that's only experienced 1 spring. So there's kind of this thing you got to figure out. I know I try to requeen every year. I don't always get it done. There's several colonies we don't get to for whatever reason, but I'm an advocate of requeening every year if you can, because you'll have better production, you'll have less swarming, and you'll have better overwintering. Quite often when you talk to somebody that has, had 10 colonies and 6 of them died, and you ask, well, how old were the queens? I don't know. Well, if you got a 2 or 3 year old queen in there, your odds of overwintering just went down dramatically. A queen from this calendar year is the one that's most likely to make it through the winter and give you the most robust colony in the spring.
Excuse me, when do you requeen? What is the best time of the year for the purpose of?
When do you requeen? Spring, summer, fall all have their advantages and disadvantages. If you requeen in the fall and you're in a dearth and you fail because the bees are robbing and it's just crazy, the odds of them successfully making another queen in order to overwinter are much lower than if you do that in the spring. If you requeen during a nectar flow, your odds of acceptance go way up. If you try to introduce a queen really early like March and you're buying the queen out of South Georgia, you might be getting an inferior product because they're always pushing the envelope down there, and not just Georgia, everywhere in the country. They're always pushing the envelope and putting out queens right on the verge of when it's acceptable, and sometimes they're not mated properly. You might even get a beautiful brood pattern and think you've got the perfect queen, but if she's only mated with 2 drones, guess what's going to happen? She's going to get superseded. And that's a lot of times when people have queens that are getting superseded in May, or their package is getting superseded in summer. That's what's going on. The queens weren't properly mated. So there's pros and cons to all of it, honestly. Yes, sir.
So, to recap, so setting up for success would be after the summer solstice, somewhere 30 days or so around there.
He's suggesting that after the summer solstice would give you the best odds of everything, overwintering, a good production queen the next year. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. So feed to stimulate if you're trying to make colonies. Again, I mentioned earlier that you can do a lot of growth artificially with sugar syrup, and there's some facts to know. Providing a steady but moderate amount of thin sucrose syrup will maximize your growth. Again, we're talking about something like perhaps 1 1/3 parts water to 1 part sugar, or 1 1/2 parts water to 1 part sugar. You want it to be pretty thin to emulate incoming fresh nectar. Now,
What's the difference between what you've got the bucket and then the mason jar on top?
well, just for the fun of it, it's not a mason jar, it's a 5-pound honey jar, which are too expensive, I'm sorry, but they are. But it's almost a half a gallon. And so it depends on the colony. In this instance, some of them needed a gallon and some only needed half a gallon. It's just as simple as that. We often use the 5-pound honey jar for 5-frame nucs and save the gallons and the 2 gallons for the colonies, but not always. Sometimes we put a gallon bucket on a nuc if they can take it. That's just a fun picture. That's in Clayton, Georgia, out on War Woman Road. I know that doesn't mean that much to anybody else, but that's a crazy name for a road.
Horses through there.
Pardon me?
They were trail riding up to War Woman.
So you know War Woman?
Yeah.
Okay. You know why it's so famous then? Nobody knows. Okay. I probably shouldn't even say this. Rabun County, where I am from, is where the movie Deliverance was filmed. Okay? And my bee yards on War Woman Road are just 5 miles from where a lot of that stuff. We won't go down that road. Providing large volumes of thick syrup will promote weight gain, but significantly reduce the stimulation effect. If you're just trying to put on weight, that's the time to use 1 1/2 or 2 to 1, sugar over water, and that would be late in the season. That's not what you want to do if you're trying to grow colonies, because they'll gain a lot of weight instead of producing a lot of comb and brood. This is how we approach sugar syrup right here. They all have their pros and cons. If you're buying a nuc or a package right now, I would recommend using 1-to-1 because you not only want to grow, brood, and create comb, but you also want to gain weight. Now, if you're just feeding colonies to expand them so you can split them again, that's where the thin stuff comes in. You don't want to just have the colony put on a lot of combs of food. You want to have them put on combs of brood. That's where the thin stuff comes in. This is the last slide. This is a self-promotion part of the presentation. And some of you guys know many of these people. This was last summer. A couple have gone and a couple more have come. It's always, you know, this constant overturn. That's my wife right there in front of me, Suzette. She is retired now, and boy, is she happy. Yeah, we have 4 permanent people in the pouring room. We call it the pouring room. It's where we pour and package our honey. Several beekeepers in that picture, several retail girls, several warehouse guys, a couple that work in the wood shop. We have quite a business going on. It's just kind of grown organically. I haven't really, you know, really pushed it hard. It just happened. A friend of mine who's gone through the same thing, he says it's just kind of like holding onto the steering wheel and hope the tires don't fly off. It's been a very long time since I've actually made a cold call on a honey customer. And when I first moved to Georgia, for the first 3 or 4 years, we had some good crops of honey, and I had to really work at selling it. And after 3 or 4 years, I didn't have to do that anymore. I don't do it. We don't call anybody. It just comes to us by word of mouth, and every year we grow anywhere from 5 to 15% without trying. And kind of some words of wisdom, you know, learned the hard way. If you provide a really good product and really good service, and you're just honest and do the best you can, and yeah, stuff's going to happen. That famous philosopher Forrest Gump says stuff happens, you know, right? Well, it's going to happen to all of us, but if you're doing the best you can, I think you're going to grow just naturally. The universe is going to provide, and that's just the way it is. And I like to say that you can spend 10 years gaining a good reputation, but it only takes you 10 seconds to lose it if you're just not, if you don't care. So you just got to care about what you're doing, and I think everything generally works out for the best. Pardon me?
Your YouTube channel.
Yeah, I always forget to do that. I know. YouTube channel. I do have a YouTube channel for those of you that don't know who I am. It's just my name. It's Bob Binnie, and the last name is spelled B as in boy, I-N-N-I-E. We have over 200 videos now. I was shocked. It was just a month ago. I looked at that and I go, what? I said, this got to be a mistake. And sure enough, we got over 200 videos. Some of them are very good. Some of them are boring. It's just, it depends, you know. Sometimes I do good and sometimes I don't. And by the way, if this turns out good and looks good, it'll come up on YouTube. So all this information will be up. And if it didn't turn out good and I don't like it, you'll never see it again. That's how that works. So I have taped more than shows up on YouTube. We have a joke in the bee yard, take 10, take 10. The YouTube videos actually make me look smarter and better than I am because I'm getting good at editing. All the ums and the ahs and the old craps, you know, those are all edited out, you know. And then if I didn't like what I said, we do it again. Now, I've been, actually while I'm speaking to you tonight, I'm listening to myself, and I've made, quite a few stutters, you know, stop, start type of things. I don't know if this is YouTube worthy. Depends if I can edit it out really good or not. But the slides, you know, sometimes what I can, this is my trick. You know, I edit in the slide, and then I can edit out me for that half a second when I screwed it up. So you don't realize that I stuttered or something like that, because the slide is hiding it. That's my trick. Anyway, we have a nice store. And by the way, yeah, if you're not that far away, Butch, how long does it take to get to our place from here?
Hour, 20 minutes.
It takes hour. Crossing. It takes about an hour and 10 minutes.
Hour and 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Took me an hour and a half through through traffic, yeah. Anyway, we do have a very nice bee supply store, and we're actually growing it right now. We're remodeling it. If you haven't been there in a couple months, you're going to be surprised when you come in. We're making a really concerted effort to be a really nice bee supply. Soon we will have a very nice website up, or nice enough, and I'll give it to you, but with a hesitation, because if you go there now, you're not going to see bee supplies. We're still building it. And it is blueridgehoneycompany.com. And within a month or so, I hope that site is up and bee supplies will be available on the website. But come in, it's a fun place to go. You can look through plate glass windows and see the processing rooms. And if you're like me, when I'm shopping for something, I want to touch it and see it, you know, rather than just order it online. And it's close enough to where you can do that. And we actually are trying to be very mindful of our prices. We're trying to play the middle ground. We're not trying to gouge. We're not trying to give it away. Quite often our prices are right in there with Man Lake and Date Ant. And this pricing, and what a struggle. It's almost like daily we have to check out what the most recent cost is and adjust. I won't go down that trail today. Okay, I know I've taken a long time. We've been here a long time. I'll just take a few questions and then we'll be done with it. Does anybody have a question?